Inside Attica Prison. For nearly a century, this place has been spoken about in whispers. A name that doesn't just describe a prison, but a warning. Thick concrete walls, steel doors, and a history so heavy it still shapes how prisons operate across America today. This is Attica Correctional Facility. What happens inside these walls is controlled, regulated, and documented. And yet, some of the most important moments here unfolded when control slipped away. When routine broke down. When survival replaced order. What you're about to hear is not legend. It's built from testimony, court records, official reports, and the lived reality of men who spent years locked inside Attica. And as this story unfolds, one question keeps returning. How did one prison become a symbol of fear, resistance, and lasting consequence? What happens next explains why Attica is still studied, still argued over, and still remembered. The routine before the storm. Attica was designed to impose order through structure. Every day began the same way, long before sunlight touched the yard. Cell doors clanged open in sequence. Count was taken. Silence was expected. Cells were small, narrow, and unforgiving. For decades, many held two men in spaces originally built for one. Steel bunks. A toilet in plain view. No privacy. No relief from the noise that never stopped echoing through the concrete corridors. Movement was controlled down to the minute. Chow. Work assignments. Recreation. Lock-in. Count again. Any deviation from routine was treated as a threat. Correctional officers carried absolute authority inside the walls. Orders were not requests. Refusal meant consequences. And those consequences could follow a man for months or years. But even strict systems develop fault lines. As populations grew and resources failed to keep up, tension began to simmer. Men from different backgrounds, different cities, different beliefs were forced into constant proximity. Racial divisions hardened. Alliances formed. And survival required learning the unwritten rules fast. Who you spoke to mattered. Where you stood mattered. Who watched you mattered even more. And beneath the routine, something else was building. Power inside the walls. On paper, Attica's power structure was clear. The administration set policy. Officers enforced it. Incarcerated men obeyed. In reality, power operated on multiple levels. Correctional officers controlled movement, discipline, and access to basic needs. They decided when searches happened, when privileges were taken, when reports were written. A single write-up could affect parole eligibility, housing assignments, and work opportunities. For incarcerated men, influence came from numbers, reputation, and organization. Some men had experience from other facilities. Some had leadership skills. Others had nothing left to lose. Informal systems formed. Communication networks spread messages faster than official announcements. Complaints were shared quietly. Anger was measured carefully. Because inside Attica, showing the wrong emotion could cost you protection. Or worse. And punishment was always close. Discipline and control. Discipline inside Attica wasn't subtle. Men who broke rules could be sent to solitary confinement, often referred to simply as the box. Small cells. Minimal light. Restricted movement. Limited human contact. Some spent days there. Others spent weeks. Mail could be delayed. Visits could be denied. Recreation could be cancelled. These punishments weren't always dramatic, but they were effective. They reminded everyone watching what happened when authority was challenged. Yet the same system that enforced order also bred resentment. Food quality was a constant source of complaint. Medical care was limited. Educational opportunities were scarce. Many men felt cut off from the outside world, forgotten by the system that locked them away. And while these frustrations built quietly, the administration believed routine would hold. They were wrong. What happens next didn't start with violence. It started with voices. The build-up. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Attica housed men who were more politically aware than ever before. News from the outside filtered in. Civil rights movements. Prison reform discussions. Court rulings challenging abusive conditions. Men began to compare notes. Why were conditions here worse than in other facilities? Why were grievances ignored? Why did change seem impossible without force? Petitions were written. Requests were made. Most went unanswered. Trust between staff and incarcerated men eroded further with every dismissal. Small incidents escalated faster. Arguments carried more weight. Officers felt authority slipping. Inmates felt pressure closing in. Then, in September of 1971, a confrontation changed everything. And once it began, there was no stopping it. The Uprising. The uprising at Attica did not unfold slowly. It exploded. In a matter of hours, control of large sections of the prison shifted. Hostages were taken. Yards filled with men demanding to be heard. What followed was not random violence. It was organized, deliberate, and rooted in years of frustration. Incarcerated men issued demands. They wanted better living conditions, fair treatment, political rights, religious freedom, protection from abuse. Negotiations began. Outside the walls, state officials faced a crisis unfolding in real time. The nation watched. Media gathered. Pressure mounted. Inside, men understood the risk they were taking. They also understood that this might be their only chance. And as days passed, the situation grew more dangerous. What happens next would leave scars that never fully healed. Negotiation and stalemate. For several days, Attica became something entirely different. Men spoke openly in the yard. Committees formed. Representatives negotiated with state officials. Demands were read aloud. Observers were brought in. There was hope. And fear. Inside the yard, order was maintained by inmates themselves. Violence against hostages was avoided. The message was clear: this was about change, not chaos. But outside the walls, patience was running out. Officials worried about setting a precedent. About appearing weak. About losing control not just of Attica, but of prisons across the country. Decisions were made behind closed doors. And when they were carried out, the consequences were devastating. The retaking. When authorities moved to retake Attica, they did so with overwhelming force. The operation was fast. It was violent. And it was deadly. Gunfire echoed through the yard. Tear gas choked the air. Men ran with nowhere to go. By the time it ended, dozens were dead. The aftermath was just as brutal. Survivors were beaten. Humiliated. Threatened. Many were forced to crawl through mud and broken glass. Medical care was delayed. Official narratives would later be challenged. Investigations would take years. Lawsuits would last decades. But for the men inside, the message was immediate. Order had been restored. At an unimaginable cost. Aftermath and legacy. Attica never went back to what it was before. Policies changed. Oversight increased. Training evolved. The uprising forced a national conversation about prison conditions and state power. But the prison remained. Men still wake up to steel doors. Still move on schedule. Still learn quickly who holds power and how to survive under it. Attica's name became shorthand for resistance, tragedy, and the limits of control. And even now, decades later, its story isn't finished. Because every prison carries the same question within its walls. How much pressure can a system hold before it breaks? And what happens when the people inside decide they have nothing left to lose? Attica stands as a reminder that walls can contain bodies, but they can't erase voices. The consequences of ignoring those voices are written into history here, in concrete and blood and silence. This place was built to hold men. Instead, it revealed the cost of forgetting their humanity. After the smoke cleared and the headlines faded, Attica settled back into something resembling routine. But it was not the same routine as before. Every movement inside the prison now carried the weight of what had happened. Officers walked the tiers more alert, more guarded. Incarcerated men watched them just as closely. Trust, already thin, had been replaced by something colder: memory. For the men living inside Attica after 1971, daily survival required understanding two prisons at once. The physical one, with its rules and schedules. And the invisible one, shaped by fear, caution, and unspoken boundaries. The day still began with count. It always did. Bodies accounted for. Doors unlocked in stages. The sound of metal on metal signaling another day that looked the same as the last. But beneath that sameness, everything had changed. Daily life under the shadow. Cells remained cramped. Privacy remained non-existent. Men learned to shrink themselves, not physically, but emotionally. You did not ask unnecessary questions. You did not stare. You did not react too strongly to anything. Work assignments became lifelines. Kitchen duty. Maintenance. Laundry. Any job that got you out of the cell for a few extra hours was valuable. Not because the work was easy, but because time passed faster when you were moving. Meals were quick and quiet. Conversations stayed low. The wrong comment at the wrong table could follow you back to the tier. Recreation offered brief relief. The yard was where alliances were visible. Who walked together? Who stayed apart? Who lifted weights? Who watched from the fence line? Men who survived longest were rarely the loudest. They listened. They observed. They learned when to speak and when silence was safer. And they all knew one thing. History mattered here. Unwritten rules. Attica, like every long-standing maximum security prison, ran on rules that were never posted. Respect was currency. Disrespect was dangerous. You did not interfere in another man's business unless invited. You did not cross racial or social boundaries without understanding the consequences. You did not involve staff in inmate conflicts unless you were prepared for permanent fallout. Because once a man was labeled unreliable, protection disappeared. These rules were not created for cruelty. They were created for survival. In a place where official protection was limited, order came from mutual understanding. Violence still happened. Fights still broke out. But open chaos was rare. Everyone knew what chaos had already cost this place. And yet, punishment remained constant. Solitary and silence. Solitary confinement continued to be one of Attica's most powerful tools. Men sent to isolation lost more than movement. They lost time. Days blurred together. Light became something measured in minutes. Human contact was reduced to brief orders and distant voices. Some men broke quickly. Others adapted in ways that left scars no one else could see. The threat of isolation kept many in line. It also deepened resentment. Because the memory of 1971 lingered in segregation more than anywhere else. Men placed alone with nothing but their thoughts often returned to the same question. If speaking up once led to bloodshed, what was the point of speaking at all? That silence became one of Attica's most enduring legacies. The officers' side. For correctional staff, Attica was also divided into before and after. Many officers who worked there after the uprising had not been present in 1971. But they inherited its consequences. New training. New oversight. New scrutiny. Every decision carried risk. Too much force invited investigation. Too little control invited disorder. Officers learned to balance authority with caution. Some did it well. Others relied on rigid enforcement. Relationships varied from tier to tier, from shift to shift. There were officers who treated incarcerated men with consistency and professionalism. And there were those who ruled through fear. Inside Attica, both approaches existed at the same time. And everyone knew which officers you could talk to, and which ones you avoided. Legal aftershocks. The uprising did not end when the yard was retaken. Investigations followed. Lawsuits were filed. Families of those killed demanded answers. Survivors challenged official accounts. For years, the truth was contested. Who fired first? Who gave orders? Who was responsible? Settlements came decades later. Acknowledgements, partial and overdue. But no ruling could undo what had happened. What the legal aftermath did accomplish was visibility. Attica forced courts, lawmakers, and the public to confront what had been ignored for too long. Prisons were no longer invisible spaces. What happened inside them mattered. At least on paper. Attica today. Attica still operates. It still houses men serving long sentences. It still follows routines that prioritize control. Technology has changed some things. Cameras are more advanced. Records are more detailed. Policies are more formalized. But the core reality remains. This is a place designed to remove freedom, not restore it. Men still measure time in counts and meals. Still learn how to exist within limits set by others. Still carry the weight of their pasts into every locked door. And every man who arrives at Attica hears the same name whispered during intake. Not as history. As warning. Why Attica still matters. Attica is studied because it represents a breaking point. It shows what happens when systems prioritize control over dignity. When complaints are ignored long enough to turn into demands. When authority answers desperation with force. It also shows the cost of forgetting. Because prisons do not exist apart from society. They reflect it. They amplify its failures. They hold the people no one else wanted to deal with. And when those systems break, the consequences ripple far beyond the walls. Attica is not frozen in 1971. It is alive, operating, and changing in small ways every day. But the questions it raised have never been fully answered. How much control is necessary? How much suffering is justified? And how long can any system rely on silence before it explodes? Inside these walls, men still live with those questions. Outside them, society decides whether it's listening this time. Time behaves differently inside Attica Correctional Facility. For men serving long sentences, time does not move forward. It circles. Days repeat themselves until memory becomes the only proof that years have passed at all. Birthdays are marked silently. Seasons change only by the temperature creeping through concrete walls. And survival, real survival, begins after the noise fades. Learning how to last. The first lesson at Attica is restraint. Men who arrive angry rarely stay safe. Rage attracts attention, and attention attracts problems. Those who last learn to narrow their world. One day at a time. Sometimes 1 hour. Older inmates often watch new arrivals closely. Not out of kindness, but curiosity. Who will adapt? Who will self-destruct? Who will make mistakes no one can undo? Advice, when it comes, is brief. Don't gamble what you can't afford to lose. Don't borrow unless you're ready to repay with more than money. Don't assume anyone owes you anything. Because debts inside Attica do not disappear. They accumulate. And eventually, they demand payment. What happens next usually determines how long a man survives here. Long sentences, short margins. Men serving decades inside Attica develop routines that look almost ritualistic. Wake up. Make the bed perfectly. Exercise in tight spaces. Read the same books over and over. Write letters that may never be answered. The mind becomes the primary battleground. Some men educate themselves. Law books, dictionaries, history texts. Others retreat inward, replaying memories until they lose their edges. The danger isn't always violence. It's erosion. Hope fades quietly. Motivation disappears. Men stop planning for futures they no longer believe they'll reach. And this is where Attica becomes most unforgiving. Because the prison does not stop when a man gives up. The doors still open. The counts still happen. The years keep moving whether you do or not. Aging behind the walls. Growing old inside Attica means watching the world change without you. Men who entered in their 20s reach their 50s, 60s, sometimes 70s inside the same walls. Their bodies weaken. Their reflexes slow. Their relevance inside inmate hierarchies fades. Protection becomes harder to maintain. Respect must be earned differently. Often through reputation alone. Medical issues become constant companions. Chronic pain. Untreated injuries. Long waits for care. And for many, family connections disappear entirely. Parents die. Children grow up. Names on visitation lists vanish. The prison does not acknowledge these losses. There is no pause for grief. Only another count. Visits and goodbyes. Visits are both lifelines and wounds. For some men, they are the only reminder that life exists beyond the fence. For others, they become too painful to endure. Watching a child grow older through glass changes a person. Watching loved ones age while you remain frozen in the same place changes you even more. Many men eventually stop requesting visits. Not because they don't care, but because caring hurts too much. And when visits end completely, something else fills the space. Resignation. When the system forgets you. Not every man inside Attica believes the system will ever reconsider his sentence. Appeals fail. Motions are denied. Files grow thicker while options disappear. Some men continue filing paperwork year after year. Others stop entirely. The prison does not reward persistence. It simply records it. And this is where Attica's true power becomes visible. Not in force. Not in punishment. But in waiting. Silence as control. Attica does not need constant violence to maintain order. Silence does the work. Men learn not to ask questions that won't be answered. Not to expect explanations. Not to imagine fairness where there is only procedure. This silence is inherited. Passed from one generation of inmates to the next. Reinforced by memory. Cemented by consequence. Because everyone knows what happened the last time voices rose too loudly here. And so most keep theirs low. The men who leave. Some men do leave Attica. Parole. Sentence completion. Transfers. But Attica leaves with them. Years of conditioning do not disappear outside the gate. Many struggle with choices, noise, crowds, freedom itself. Some return to prison within months. Others disappear into anonymity. And a few speak. Their stories are rarely dramatic. They talk about boredom. About pressure. About learning to survive by becoming smaller versions of themselves. They talk about Attica not as a single event, but as a slow experience. One that never truly ends. What Attica really teaches. Attica teaches that control can exist without understanding. That order can be maintained without justice. That systems can function even when they fail the people inside them. It teaches patience. Sometimes too much of it. It teaches silence. Sometimes permanently. And it teaches that when pressure builds long enough, history does not forget where it breaks. Attica is not just a place. It is a lesson written in years, lives, and consequences. It asks uncomfortable questions about power, punishment, and what society chooses not to see. Inside these walls, men are still counting time. Still learning how to endure. Still living with decisions made long before they arrived. And outside, the world continues forward, rarely looking back. But Attica remains. Waiting. Here, the gates close, but the questions don't. Attica isn't just history. It's a reminder of what happens when power goes unquestioned, when voices are ignored, and when silence becomes policy. Long after the lights go out and the doors lock, the consequences still echo, inside the walls, and far beyond them. This story doesn't end here. It lingers. In memory. In policy. In every place built to punish without listening. And whether we choose to confront that, or keep looking away, is what truly decides what comes next.